Hello,
Mic on?
hello.
You want my mic on, yeah? You hear me?
Can you hear me, John?
Yes. Very well, yes. Thank you.
Okay, this is the beginning of the broadcast. Okay, so just like to welcome everybody to come to join us, and those who are listening to us on live. Uh, we've come to have a discussion about what John's work's about, what he's the values and principles and the theories he uses within his work within ALP. And I'll start by you would normally start by introducing John, but I'm going to actually let him do it himself. So, John, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Aberdeen, Dundee. My name's John Player, like the cigarettes, and I'm a community development worker, an adult education worker. I've been involved in youth work, community development, and adult education since 1981. Before that, I was at Murray House and Stirling University in '74. Not a glorious history, but I won't go into that right now. I now work for the Adult Learning Project, which is now based in Tollcross. It used to be based in Gorgie Dalry, but it's based now in Tollcross Community Centre. So I'm an adult education worker employed by the council, City Edinburgh Council, Community Learning and Development. But I'm sort of seconded to the Adult Learning Project and its association, which is like a trade union of learners,
Okay, thanks, John. We were speaking earlier this morning, and you were saying about how adult literacies wasn't your forte at the very beginning of this, and how it came about that you got involved in adult literacies. Would you like to sort of explain a little bit more about that? Because you were saying it wasn't your main sort of topic.
Well, when I went back to Murray House in '83 to '85, they let me into the second year because I'd had a not a very glorious pass in the '70s, and they let me into the second year after doing a couple of years' work in West Hales. At '85, there was no jobs. It was similar to it was very similar to the present kind of current context. Tories were in power. Thatcher was in power. There was no work in Scotland. I can remember my mate Murray Fergie got the only community education job, and then my old tutor from 1978 asked me if I wanted to come or at least apply for the job with the social work department in Royston in Glasgow, Royston Hill in Glasgow. So my patch in North Glasgow for 4 years was Royston Hill, Black Hill, Germiston and Sighthill, and it wasn't an area I'd ever been in before, and I certainly thought I'd seen things until I arrived there. I can remember I'd stopped smoking for 2 years, and the second day I was there, I started back on the cigarettes. It was such a kind of shock to the system. It was a kind of Irish ghetto, really, Royston Hill. And I can remember I was working with a close colleague over the years who was into adult literacies and was talking a lot about Paolo Freire. And at the time, we were concerned with the kind of political issues, especially the mass redundancies at the Cali works, the Springburn works. So I wasn't entirely sure how the literacies agenda fitted in with that. We were off looking at the effects of the closure of the Springburn locomotives work and the effect of 4,000 redundancies. The actual area I was working in, you could see the Cali plant, the Springburn plant, out of our window, really. But most people from Royston, because of the sectarian thing, they didn't get jobs as skilled workers in there. They got the cleaners' jobs, despite the workers being really sort of salt of the earth people. There was still that edgy sectarianism, and a Tim from Royston Hill wouldn't get a job, certainly not a skilled job in the Cali. So we were looking at health and social audit of the effects of redundancy there. The poll tax came along, people started to get organised like we've never seen before. We set up food cooperatives, we got involved in anti-poll tax work. The local MP stopped the social work department being a organisational base for anti-poll tax unions. Michael Martin, the Speaker of the House, that's right, Michael. He was a terrible man, but he stopped the anti-poll tax work and at the time we didn't articulate this work with literacies. There wasn't really a knowledge that there was after the study that produced the Alness report 2001, and that's the kind of key moment. Catherine McRae and people who were really bringing to light the OECD findings in Western Europe about poor literacy levels, and the Alness report highlighted 1 in 5, even greater than that, Scots had difficulty managing text, had difficulty in reading and writing. So by 2001, I was back in Wester Hailes. I was influenced by the Alness report. I was keen really to synthesize my understanding of community development with some of the literacies work when I was doing the training. And then the job came up. Vernon Gallen, we moved up to university, and there was a job going at the Adult Learning Project. And I'd heard people talk about Paulo Freire, as I said, in Glasgow. And your man, Ian Martin, had organised a bicentenary conference about adult education that I attended before 2001. And the Kirkwoods, Jerry and Colin Kirkwood, who wrote the book about Freire in Scotland, The Story of the Adult Learning Project, they started, there was a workshop and it was packed, and it was about really Paulo Freire, and they started to give, I mean, they're friends of mine now, but at the time I felt very oppositional and antagonistic, because they said, you know about Paulo Freire, you know, and it was sort of with glazed eyes, and I said, well, I don't know anything about Paulo Freire, to be honest with you. And you know, so it was almost an evangelical call. I've always rejected the evangelical notions of Paulo Freire. It's partly through the liberation theologist sort of connections. We do have people that are attracted to Adult Learning Project because of liberation theology, Freire being involved in that. But despite that, in a way, when taking up the post, I worked for 10 years with my colleague now and friend, Stan Reeves, who was almost a Freirean fundamentalist. He was there from the setting up of the Adult Learning Project 35 years ago, at a time when the Workers' Educational Association had started to engage with pedagogy of the oppressed. And I really think workers and students and literacy workers should try and engage with this kind of wordy, verbose and ugly text in a way, but it's a methodology. The methodology is there about codification, decodification, and linking literacy's work to the context in which we live. So the Alness report was key for me, and my colleague Stan Reeves and his other 2 colleagues, when ALP was set up, were sent away for 3 months to engage with pedagogy of the oppressed, to read the text, to study it, and to learn it almost off by heart, and then impose it. In some ways, it wasn't an imposition, and then unleash it on the poor people of Gorgie Dalry. But what they did do, and partly because of Stan's history as a professional photographer, was was to develop codes, and a code's like a distillation, it's the distillation of culture, like a photograph, or the most powerful code that the Alps used, and it's in the book if people are interested. It's the one where the Scots beat England down at Wembley. I think it's 81 or 79. They beat England, and then they go rage. They go absolutely bonkers, tear down the goalposts, and cut up the goalposts and take the turf and all this kind of stuff. So they use that as a code, and the decodification process is in pedagogy of the oppressed. I mean, it's a kind of looking at it's none of this is rocket science. What do people see immediately? And what Freire took an artist with him around the villages and the slums in the early 60s in Brazil, and they would devise codes of people's lives. But they couldn't be propaganda, they couldn't be too didactic. They had to have a certain amount of ambivalence so people could discuss them. And with the Portuguese language being different from English, and the structure of Portuguese being different from English, they would set up word lists. So the famous one is the one of the flava, the slum, and then they would, what is in this picture? And then they would write down, and they begin to rota learn, you know, there's a wall, and people would start to write it down, begin the sort of rota, functional literacy stuff. And then the question, the critical part, the critical pedagogical part from pedagogy of the oppressed is, why are we living like that? How for people to begin to speak their word in cultural circles about why are we, how is it us that aren't reading and writing well? Why are we living in these conditions, and what are we going to do about it? So the surface structure being the immediate images and writing them down for the functional literacy. The critical literacy bit is the underneath, the deeper structure. Why are we struggling with reading and writing? Is it an accident? All these kind of questions. Why do one social class read and write and another don't? So the code that was used of the tearing down of the goalposts at Wembley, the questions were, who's missing? There's no black people, there's no women. Why are we all steaming? Why are we all drunk? Why are we all wearing tartan? And out of that, to a certain extent, was the impetus for the Scottish Music Group, for the Democracy Group, for the work around the Convention for the Scottish Parliament. So it was a catalyst. There was a catalyst for people to reflect upon their situation and what it meant to be Scottish, and look at things like identity, who's missing. Why are we behaving like this? And certainly the analysis was because we can't celebrate our world. We live, as Ferry says, in a culture of silence. We've lost the ability, and they set up the Scottish Music Group for the Keeley stuff and all this kind of thing, which had a lot of success.
John, I think it's a good point. You've explained why and how ALP kind of works. Would you be able to relate this to sort of the family learning? You know, this is the students. This is the module that we're on. Is it linked to the stuff that you did with your research yourself into the football with the group?
Much. That code really was in some ways the inspiration for us. Next door, the aspect of family learning. I mean, we were in the old base in Dalry was a shop front surrounded by tenements, so everybody used it. It was, I mean, that's why we moved to Tollcross, because it was overwhelmed with workers and people. So there was a big, not a familist emphasis, but there was a big kind of community and family emphasis in the adult learning project. And the big thing for us at the adult learning project is cultural exchange, especially to Ireland, Brittany, the Basque Country, and then Spain, Germany. So this thing about learning from other cultures, and we went down to Newcastle. I mean, another culture, but a similar culture, and we went to Sunderland after the stabbing of a refugee in Sunderland, and we were looking at what was happening in Scotland after the death of the Kurdish refugee in 2001 in Sighthill in Glasgow, and we were looking at the asylum seeker refugee kind of thing. And then we also went to Sunderland Football Club, partly because at the time I was doing football coach training because my son was wee and nobody else would do it. So we had a link with Sunderland. That was with the Inverleith Park. We had a link somehow with Sunderland. I mean, and it's the stadium of light. And Sunderland's like Dundee without the sense of humour. You know what I mean? It's like an ugly. There's no other way to describe it. It's an ugly kind of de-industrialised town. And if there's anybody from Sunderland, you know, you've got a lot of other things in your favour. But what the transcendence of this stadium of light, is remarkable. It's like a phoenix out of the ashes. This lovely football stadium. And at the time when we went to visit it, they had one of the people there was telling us about their truanting project, that kids who wouldn't go to school but they would come to Sunderland, the government strip. They would go into the bar, they'd put the bar back, and they get out computing and all this kind of stuff, and they'd help them with their written work. And when we returned, given we were right next door almost to Heart Midlothian Football Club, I went and just kind of chapped at this guy's door, Alan White, who's was the manager really of, at the time, it was their sort of extension program and coaching program. And he sort of said, "No bother you, just come along, we'll get you a room in the Willie Bald suite." Willie Bald's one of the 1950s heroes of Heart Midlothian Football Club. And we, because of the razzmatazz of the football club, immediately when we kind of set it up, we started a leaflet, we handed out leaflets in the street. We used the media as best we could, but mainly through what people began to hear about us. And the Willie Bald Suite is not the greatest educational suite, but it's part of the culture. People feel safe there. The Jambos feel safe there, and the Hibs. That's my team actually. But the Hibernian people would come wearing their Hibs scarves and strutting out their chest, and we're even in Jambo Land and all this kind of the banter. And then there's quite a lot of Rangers and Celtic supporters. So then we start really to get down to speaking our word. I think that there's through the research, there's a Professor Stick, S-T-I-C-H-T, from the United States, who came over to speak for Education Scotland, and his thing, he worked with Freddie before Freddie died in the early 90s or late 80s. Professor Stick, a good lad, and he was talking about the first step to literary oracy, getting people to be able to speak their word. That's the Freudian idea, to speak their word about their situation, about their passions. So it immediately became apparent that the learners had incredible, vast, almost Python-esque, like Monty Python, really, knowledge about football and football teams and the jargon and the words of football. The players that could recite, like Michael Palin, 1936 Soviet Union team, and the Real Madrid winners, and people can do it's incredible the amount of knowledge. But when you put a pen or a laptop in their hands, they were deflated. Then to try and apply that to the written word, it's the functional bit is the difficult bit, because the first half of the session, we have 2 hours. We've run the course at Heart Midlothian since 2004. We ran it for a couple of years at Hibernian, but it's just about worker time and resources. And we've run it for a couple of years at Spartans Football Club, and also at Spartans we had a five-a-side pitch that we could play. But it cost us £100 a week. I mean, I love Spartans, but they're a private sector business, really, as our football club. So when it comes to talking about money and resources, their faces change, and there's a grim sort of living. They're getting the real world, John, that kind of thing. This will cost you £100 a week. So that's a difficult thing for us, and we've always borrowed, begged, and stole money to run this project.
John, could I ask you what you actually did? What did the men do? I mean, you say they come from the different.
Not just begging. The biggest.
What actually happened when you came? You've been running for 2 years, but how did you've mentioned a little bit about how it started, but it's kind of to give advice as to, if you're trying to work with men, for example, which I take it, were there any women in your group? I don't know.
That's right. The biggest growing sport in the world is women's football. So as the years have gone on, we have a significant cohort of women dressed in their strips. They play either for Spartans or Hibs women, or the All Stars. That's another football team. Last night we had the LGBT, that's the lesbian, gay, transsexual, bisexual group. But they have a great football team called the Hot Scots. So it goes when you're talking about family and families, then it's not just a preserve of men now, but the thing about the men is because they're so knowledgeable about it, their whole culture to get on in Scotland, certainly in work. If you know a wee bit about football, then it's an open door. You can, the boozer, you can talk endlessly rubbish about football, and it's a way in. It's a code. It's a code. Yes. So we've the Hearts phone us and say, could you ask your learners to stop coming at 5 o'clock? Because the class doesn't start till 7, but they would come every night. They would come every night. It's just they feel safe there. It's a representation of a history, and without getting over romantic, but it's a representation of something they feel proud about. Mm-hmm. And they wouldn't come to Tollcross Community Centre. So any agency, if workers are interested, that is rooted in the people. Like we've done another thing called Boxing Clever, which is in a boxing group in Cloverstone and West of Hales, and that was reasonably successful. So again, it had famous boxers, all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't have to be football, but it's something that belongs to the people, and people are not empty vessels, as Freddie says. You pour knowledge in. It's having a dialogue with people about what they feel confident about, and then they will trust the educator enough really to take them into some of the more functional stuff in literacies.
So what kind of functional stuff did you do, or have you done with them, John? You've been working for a wee while. We'll go on to your research in a little bit, but it is about they're very interested in football. Like, so what? How do you use that interest and to get them to be writing or building their confidence? And the other thing is, does it relate to their family life? Does it?
We have to evaluate the project on the effects. Has it changed your? Has there been any significant effect in your family and your community? So from evaluations, but the thing, and HMIE Scotland have come up with this as well. Whether or not we have overwhelming success on the functional literacy, we certainly have success on the confidence building. That's people working in groups, being able to speak their word, being able to work within a structure that they create. And even I think what we do every week, for example, in the functional stuff is write a match report. So we've got loads of volunteers. We'll link up with the learners, and they'll talk about, we saw Real Madrid play Barcelona. It was suffused with Sky TV, so people are watching big games every week. Or they're going to watch a Birmingham or a Heart of Midlothian in Edinburgh, and then they'll begin to write that down, and then it's a way into learning vocabulary, learning how to spell football, how to spell referee, how to read the game, and therefore read the word, and from the Freudian point of view is to read the world. So the football is a bit like the metaphor of the crisis in which we live. So that's the more critical bit. Like with Rangers Football Club, what's happening at Hearts? They sacked the manager yesterday. They're in real crisis. Who owns Hearts? Romanov and his bank. So it's a metaphor. It's a microcosm of the crisis in which we live. But to be effective in the crisis in which we live, then it's very difficult if you can't read and write, and you can't articulate. If you want to write to Romanov, which we've done on countless occasions, then you need to read and write. If you want to say this, if you want to organise fans, if you want to organise a fans trust to take over, like they've done in Dundee, Stirling Albion, Annan, clubs are beginning to be taken over by the fans. But you have to be able to manage text to do these sort of things. And so it's how to translate this passion, this love that these men and women have, and young men and women in particular have for the game, and so I suppose the metaphor, the encodification, the creation bit is if they can take control of their football club, can we take control of industry? Can we take control of the banks? Can we take control of our world? So that's the Freudian bit. That's the pedagogy of the oppressed. But Freddie was keen on rigour. He was keen on rigour. When he came to speak in Stirling, there was loads of ComEd people went to see him, you know, and they were all a bit gooey about old Powell. I mean, they're still gooey about it. I mean, you can imagine what they were like then. But he talked about, I'm not a facilitator. I reject this term facilitation. I'm an educator. I'm a teacher. I have a menu of ideas, I have a body of knowledge, and I'm here to teach learners. I'm not here to facilitate anything. But through a dialogue, that's the sort of learning approach that he's advocated, the Mercado Paulo Freire. So it's that the educator has a role, he or she has authority with that knowledge, but the learners have knowledge as well, and through the dialogue new knowledges can be created. That's the encodification. And how do we and using the encodification after decoding the world, after reading the world, if we can take control of Romanov, if we can explain what's happening at Rangers Football Club, you know, with the in the third division, the whole culture around that, the whole culture of sectarianism, division, you're into his whole historical process, and it's all played out. It's all played out in a cultural representation. So it's a gift for us as literacy educators. And I'd really recommend, if there are people listening, that they have a look at their like Falkirk Football Club's got a really good community kind of approach. Get involved in the football clubs. Ask them why they don't have a literacy group there, or look at setting one up. Get the money, go and do it.
Yeah. John, that's great. Could you explain a little bit more now onto your research? You've done your research with case studies within several of these six of the people that were involved in the group. Would you like to say a little bit about what you found out and how that's kind of come about? And obviously it relates to what they've got out of the being involved in the project.
Yes. Well, I think most of the learners, or all there's one thing about all the learners at the Glory and Dismay. They're from occupational social class 5. They're from the poorest section of society in Scotland, and along with that goes the whole kind of accolade of violence, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, inequities, inequality, poor educational experience. Education is a dangerous memory. You were taught to fail or taught to labour at best. So the key determinant for literacy acquisition from my research, and it's a qualitative piece of research drawn upon other people's work and my own work, is the thing about social class. Social class is a key determinant for poor literacy acquisition in Scotland, and there hasn't really been any other systematic research into football programs, because there's really not very many. But in my research, I think the most powerful thing for me is I would recommend educators and community educators in particular to have a look at the work done by Norman Fairclough. So he was the professor at Lancaster University, and Lancaster, Mary Hamilton, Ruth Wodak, these sort of people were very instrumental in helping with the Alness report. They along with Paul Freire and Catherine McCrae, really was the underpinning, the theoretical underpinning to the social practice model, which differs from England. In England, it's much more functional, about testing people, about how do we know we've made a difference. So that was a big thing for my research. Certainly certainly when I started out, that was the query. How do we know people can, if they've been at glory and dismay for 6 years, they can spell football any better? But the social practice model is about self-assessment. How do people feel about that? It's their self-analysis and the effect it has on their family, or on their world, which is it's a much deeper thing. It's a much deeper thing, and quite easily dismissed. But we have in Scotland a commitment to this social practice model. So the glory and dismay is very much part of that. And how do we hear about learners' voices? So my research was looking at research that had been done mainly in Canada about learners' voices, and how then do we look at some sort of narrative account of people's experience in the glory and dismay, and also then to ask them to look at, for example, what I used was a Sun, that's a Sun newspaper editorial about Gordon Brown at the time being a bit soft on asylum seekers, and then at the same time, what I did through the steer from Norman Fairclough was this discourse analysis. So discourse is just language in use. We're involved in a discursive exchange here, so it's a word that's overused. However, it's the way ideology and ideas are perpetuated through discourse, and how do we explore that? How do we unveil it? This is the decodification process. How do we decode discourse, and how do we unveil it? And some of these words are phrased. So we looked at a match report when Celtic were playing, and looked at the colloquialism and also the emphasis on war, captain striking, the whole obvious sort of stuff. But the way football reporting in the Sun's clever. The Sun are clever. They employ really good football commentators and football journalists, and then the thing about Fairclough is also looking at how the texts, there's an idea of it, and again it's not rocket science, how do they cohere, the coherence in the metaphors, how do the football writers cohere with that image of, we're being too soft on asylum seekers and the Iraqis and all this kind of stuff. And the same language is used, whether or not it's a conscious thing. Certainly I'm not a conspirator, I'm not an advocate of conspiratorial thinking really, but there's whether or not it's an unconscious thing, but it certainly draws people in to the Sun, and to then they're unleashed with the editorials and the ideology, partly through the emphasis on sport. And same language used in sport as it's used in their political analysis.
John, can I just ask you? We've got a couple of questions coming in about, you're saying that this is the glory and dismay is one way of working with families. Does ALP have any other sort of other projects that you're involved in? And I take it from what you're saying is that it's the rather fairy approach you would take whichever way you were working with any kind of family projects. If I'm wrong, then correct me. But are there any other projects where you're working with families, or is there a link?
No. There's a big women's development section within the Adult Learning Project. There was an Act for Women, a Fair for Women. There's a group that's really active called Damn Rebel Bitches, and the big thing for them is creche. They're up in arms at the moment about the lack of creche facilities for women to be able to attend the courses at the Adult Learning Project. So a bit of it's about campaigning, about getting resources for families to be able to attend that. So there's a parents group being set up. The whole idea of parents groups and parents classes has been a contested one, certainly within community education. The worry about middle class do-gooders going into areas and setting up parenting lessons. There's been a kind of resistance to that, but there is skills, knowledge and understanding in being a parent, and how through a dialogical approach that can take place. So there's a parents group, there's women's groups who, that's the Damn Rebel Bitches in particular, and the Arte Femme, that's looking at different constructs of women that aren't sexist, that aren't belittling or positioning women in a certain sense. So the family aspect is important within the adult learning project.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good. John, before we maybe we'll get some more questions, but before we leave, I'm interested in how you got on with your research yourself, your reflections on it and how it went, because some of the people will be doing presentations as part of this module, and some will be doing research. And I was kind of interested because we spoke about Brookfield at our last day that we were all together, and I was just a little bit interested about your reflections on the research process that you were involved in.
Well, I suppose the first thing to do is get the consent of the learners, because I've got some of the work published in this More Powerful Literacies with a book launched last week, and making sure you change the names, making sure you have the consent of the learners. So that was a place to start before the interviewing of learners. Then the learners were subjected to at least 2 or 3 interviews, and they were all tape recorded. So I had structured questions to ask them. Do you think the Glory and Dismay has made a difference in your life? That kind of thing. Do you think how do you, from a self-evaluative point of view, think you've improved in reading and writing, and could you give some examples of that? Could you give some evidence of that? And then, so I would tape it and then literally type the thing out. So you've got, it releases you to engage more with the learner, just to record the whole thing and then get their kind of views really kind of archived, and then it gives you the material on which to work. So the transcription is a whole area of methodology with its own kind of finesse and everything, and worth looking at, because there's a whole area there. So it's really learners' voices, given that, making sure you get their consent, and that's a signed agreement, and then so you get all the information and unexpected information. For example, unexpected going out. I had to stop going out to people's houses because there could be issues in the house, there could be difficulties in the house. It was unexpected that you had to act upon, especially if you were employed by children and families. So there's all these, then moving that to making sure they come into the community centre, and the argument between qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis. Can you generalise from such small amount of cases, that kind of thing, and so that in some ways the quantitative stuff was done by the ALNIS and the government, but the probing, the more in-depth thing comes through qualitative analysis.
Okay. Thanks very much, John. That's good. I mean, people are interested in the dialogical approach, this kind of relationship that you have with it's not this kind of one-to-one, it's about using the group, etc. But are there any projects where adults and children learn together in related to ALP?
There's a greater emphasis upon this because the early years agenda, partly because of the early years agenda of the government. There's greater emphasis on that. We went through the football thing, and Adult Learning Project 2010 went to Barcelona, and the Centre for the Study into Social Inequalities at Barcelona, the university in Barcelona, made sure we went to a school in Montserrat where the children of migrants are asked to use a kind of dialogical approach. They sat in kind of familiar adult education groups. They talked about, they were reading Cervantes, that's the writer of Don Quixote, and Homer. They seemed much more advanced than children of and certainly my recollection and knowledge of primary school education in Scotland at the moment, although things hopefully will change with the curriculum for excellence. But the point I was trying to make is when Adult Learning Project was set up 33, 34 years ago, the community education meant youth work. So the old guard at the Adult Learning Project have been quite keen to maintain adult education space. But given the referendum coming up in 2014, 16-year-olds are have a vote. So it's even more important, I think, and most people in the Adult Learning Project are beginning to be convinced of involving younger people in the project. And through this, our new base since 2004 is part of the Galaxy campus. So we work closely with the parents. With the parents groups are really at an embryonic stage. How do we work with the school? The school aren't too happy really about this group being next door to them, especially all the migrants they've talked about. I mean, there's serious proposals to have a fence to split us off from the school, the worries about child protection, all this kind of stuff. And that all has to be addressed, but there's a possibility through the Curriculum for Excellence that recognises that learning it takes place beyond and should take place beyond the school campus. But old habits are difficult to change, but there are examples certainly of dialogical learning in schooling, especially in Barcelona and Montserrat, and other places in Latin America. So we're seeking to get into a dialogue with school teachers about that, but we don't have any classes at the moment where children are involved. If they are involved at the moment, it's women coming in and saying, I need childcare for my bairn if I'm going to be attending here, and if we don't have childcare, then it's going to run about here. So we haven't really addressed that regarding children, and except through the football and through a bike club we've set up. Bicycle. I mean, I'm a cyclist, so it's one of my passions. So we set up a bike club, and that was to attract some of the guys who were throwing bricks through the window. So, given cycling's kind of trendy at the moment, and Danny McCaskill and people like that are hopefully going to come and open our bike club. So he's like, he's broken everybody in his every bone in his body, and he's worth looking at on YouTube. It's just it's a beautiful sort of transcendent thing, a bit like football. So young people are really into him, and so we're trying to get them involved, give them bikes and all this kind of stuff. So that's a long process. Again, it's because adult education was kind of marginalised within community education, certainly when that was set up.
Hello, John, are you still there?
Yeah.
You seem to be breaking up, John, a little bit. Sorry about that. So we last heard about the bike club and everything. If people are interested to find out exactly what ALPA are doing, have you got sort of read? I mean, you've mentioned a couple of theorists and readings. You've got a chapter in the Powerful Literacies book. I'm not sure if that's going to be available to everybody or it's still within the book. But if people were interested in finding out what these programs and how they set up and the history, it's hard to do it in sort of 40 minutes talk. But are there kind of avenues that people can chase up?
Well, we're coming into the 21st century regarding information technology. This is the most sophisticated information technology thing I've ever been involved in. But no, that's not true. Vernon set up a thing with Brazil and Madrid, looking at Freudian work, and we communicated a wee bit like this. But if people are interested, just to Google the Adult Learning Project, and there's a website. It's been brought into the 21st century. But if people would like, I think even better than that would be for Gary and maybe to perhaps organise a visit to come and spend a day with us. That's traditionally what students do. They come and they spend a day with us, visit the projects, sit in the groups, that kind of thing. But I suppose the first port of call would be to Google the Adult Learning Project and get on the website and then make contact with us. And a lot of the Kirkwood stuff has been reprinted in Concept, the Community Education Journal, and there's been an update. There's been an update of the story of the Adult Learning Project. That's by the two Kirkwoods, and it was reprinted in Amsterdam a couple of years back with a long introduction, which is an update of what's happened with football and all this kind of stuff in it. So that's the story of the Adult Learning Project, Freddie in Scotland, Colin and Jerry Kirkwood, and that's been reprinted and updated about 2 or 3 years ago. It's also printed in Spanish at the Paulo Freire Institute in Seville, which if people are into Paulo Freire, then Stan Reeves is speaking there next week, so they could jump on a plane and go and listen to the old Reevesy speak. But that would be the first port of call, is maybe to get on the website and through the Dundee universities, we had a student from Dundee for 3 months in the last year, maybe to make more physical contact with us and organise something that way. That's an interesting idea about children and adults working together in dialogical groups. That's something we've been starting to think about through the parents group, working with the school, and the visit to Montserrat in Barcelona, where that's what they're actually doing. But we're a long way off from that. Yes. We have a family literacy worker, Jane Prowse, based in our team, but with the cuts and everything, people are much more generic. They're glorified janitors and all this kind of stuff. So there's less. We've been halved as a service. I mean, it's one of these big hidden cuts in the George Osborne's austerity cuts. We've been halved as a service, and in the public service, I mean, with the union line is don't cover for cuts, but it's very, very difficult to implement.
Okay, John. On that note, I think we'll end it there. But thanks very much for your input, and I suspect you're going to get lots of invites or people coming down to speak to you.
Brilliant.
About your project. So thank you very much indeed, John. If you just stay on it.
Look forward to it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.